Spock laughing in Star Trek IV wasn't out of character, it completed the Vulcan's resurrection story. When Leonard Nimoy's Spock let out a chuckle in Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, it sent shockwaves through the fandom. For a character famously defined by emotional suppression and unshakable logic, Spock's moment of levity felt jarring, almost heretical, to those who believed Vulcans never showed such unrestrained feelings. But rather than being out of character, Spock's laughter in The Voyage Home was a perfect culmination of his rebirth, a quiet but profound milestone in his journey from death, through rediscovery, to emotional integration. This wasn't Spock breaking character, it was Spock completing his arc. Spock's death wasn't the end, but a transition. To understand why Spock's laughter mattered, you first have to look back at his death in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. His noble sacrifice in the reactor room wasn't just the end of a life, it was the beginning of a transformation. Spock died as a fully logical Vulcan, a being who had long struggled to silence his human half in favor of pure rationality. His final words, "The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few," were spoken with clarity and serenity. At that moment, Spock had achieved the perfect Vulcan ideal, selflessness through logic. But the search for Spock turned that perfect end into a new beginning. His rebirth on the Genesis planet, his refusion with his Katra, and his slow reorientation to his identity all set up a Spock who was no longer just a Vulcan or a human, but both. And for the first time, he had a clean slate to decide how those parts of him would coexist. The new Spock, logical, but learning. When Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home opens, Spock is still finding himself. His mind has been restored, but his emotional center remains unbalanced. He speaks in short, clipped phrases and is devoted to logic like a student who's re-memorizing a textbook. When asked to make choices, he defaults to logic rather than instinct. This isn't the old Spock, this is a Spock unsure of how much of himself he is allowed to be. We see it clearly when Spock is being tested by computers on Vulcan. His mother, Amanda, asks him the simplest of questions, "How do you feel?" And Spock, with all sincerity, answers, "I do not understand the question." It's a powerful moment. Here's a man who has literally been reborn, but who still doesn't know how to feel. Spock is not trying to ignore his humanity anymore, he's relearning it. And that journey takes him on the most human adventure of all, traveling back to 20th century Earth. Humor in The Voyage Home is a mirror for Spock. The Voyage Home is often celebrated as the funniest Star Trek movie, and that's no accident. The fish-out-of-water premise lets the crew's future sensibilities clash with the chaos of 1980s San Francisco. For Spock, who is still working from a purely logical framework, the culture shock is even more intense. Yet it also becomes a perfect crucible for growth. Take, for example, the famous colorful metaphors scene. Kirk tries to teach Spock how to blend in by swearing, which leads to Spock robotically repeating phrases like "the hell they did" in his dry monotone. It's comedic gold, but more importantly, it shows Spock trying. He's mimicking emotion, not out of sarcasm, but out of a desire to connect. The fact that he does it clumsily only highlights how human he is underneath. Humor becomes a pathway, not just for comedy, but for evolution. And eventually, we reach the moment where Spock no longer imitates humor, he feels it. The laugh, a small moment with galactic weight. Late in the film, after a series of high-stakes missions and fish rescuing hijinks, Kirk makes a joke about Spock having a hell of a time. Spock responds with a visible grin and a small laugh. It's not loud. It's not a guffaw. But it's real. And that's what makes it powerful. This is not Spock slipping out of character, it's Spock growing in character. After 3 films of sacrifice, rebirth, and rediscovery, this brief chuckle is his final proof of life. He is no longer the pure Vulcan of the Wrath of Khan, nor the confused reborn soul of the search for Spock. He is now a unified being, both human and Vulcan, both logical and emotional. Leonard Nimoy, who directed The Voyage Home, knew exactly what he was doing. The humor was never just for laughs, it was therapy. The entire mission to rescue the whales paralleled Spock's inner story, reconnecting with a lost past Earth's extinct whales, translating emotion into action, and ultimately saving the future by embracing the irrational parts of himself. Vulcans don't suppress emotion, they master it. There's a misconception that Vulcans have no emotion. But Star Trek lore makes it clear. Vulcans feel deeply. That's why they created their logical philosophy, to prevent those intense emotions from leading to chaos. Spock's arc is about finding balance, not erasure. In that light, his laughter isn't a betrayal of his culture, it's an acceptance of it. After all, Sarek, his father, eventually opens up emotionally in Star Trek: The Next Generation. Tuvok, another Vulcan, expresses subtle emotion with quiet intensity in Voyager. Even the original series had moments where Spock showed flashes of feeling, pain when he thought Kirk was dead, pride in the accomplishments of his crew. The difference in the voyage home is that the laughter is earned. It isn't accidental. It's not the result of outside forces or temporary madness. It's a moment of Spock consciously allowing himself to feel joy. Spock's human half was never a weakness. Throughout the original series and films, Spock's dual heritage is often portrayed as a source of inner conflict. He tries to suppress his human side to gain control, believing logic is the only path to peace. But the voyage home flips the script. It's his human qualities, empathy, curiosity, humor that allow him to connect with Dr. Gillian Taylor, help save the whales, and contribute to the mission's success. When Spock chooses to laugh, he isn't choosing emotion over logic, he's choosing to integrate them. That's the genius of his resurrection story. It's not just about bringing Spock back to life. It's about letting Spock become whole. The final test of identity. At the end of the voyage home, Spock is asked by a Starfleet representative if he has anything to say in his defense. After a pause, he replies, "I have nothing to say, except that I stand with my shipmates." That line, delivered without flourish, is the most Vulcan and most human thing he could have said. It reflects loyalty, logic, and emotion. He is no longer the divided man he once was. He is someone who has found peace in his duality. In that light, his earlier laughter isn't just a joke, it's a foreshadowing of this new Spock. A Spock who no longer hides behind doctrine or rejects emotion. A Spock who can smile and still be logical. A Spock who has been to the edge of life and back and come out better for it. Spock's laugh echoes through Star Trek's legacy. Spock's moment of laughter in the voyage home remains one of the most subtle yet revolutionary beats in Star Trek's long history. For longtime fans, it may have seemed incongruous at first. But in context, it's the most natural thing in the world. The stoic Vulcan who once feared his own emotions had learned to live with them. Future portrayals of Spock, Zachary Quinto in the Kelvin timeline, Ethan Peck in Strange New Worlds build upon this foundation. These newer Spocks don't ignore emotion. They wrestle with it, navigate it, and try to understand it, just like the original. And all of that started not in a battle or in space, but in a chuckle in the middle of San Francisco traffic. Conclusion: the laugh that meant everything. Character thing he could do.